Greetings and welcome to the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. virtual event sponsored by the University of Arkansas, Pulaski Tech College. My name is Mayo Johnson, and I'm Assistant Professor of Computer Science and a member of the Cultural Diversity and Community Involvement Committee. As your moderator, I want us to discuss the legacy of Dr. King and be engaged in our theme, social justice and equity in the pandemic. Dr. King was the most visible leader of the civil rights movement. He received such awards such as the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the Congressional Gold Medal, and the Nobel Peace Prize. Dr. King said the following: "The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality." I'd like to introduce our esteemed panel. Judge Tjuana Byrd Manning is a Pulaski County Circuit Judge in the 8th Division. She serves by appointment as the chairman of the Racial Justice Task Force for the Arkansas Supreme Court's Commission on Children, Youth, and Families. She also serves on the Arkansas Coalition for Juvenile Justice. Judge Wendell Griffen is a pastor of New Millennium Church in Little Rock, Arkansas, CEO and owner of Griffen Strategic Consulting, PLLC, and circuit judge for the 6th Judicial District of Arkansas, 5th Division. His consulting practice is based in Little Rock, Arkansas, and provides strategic advice and assistance to clients concerning cultural competence and inclusion diversity. Professor Andre Cummings is Associate Dean of Faculty Research and Development and the Charles C. Baum Distinguished Professor of Law at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock William Bowen School of Law. He is also the co-director of the Bowens Law Center for Racial Justice and Criminal Justice Reform. Thank you, panel, for being here. Before we begin, we will open the chat for participants to ask questions in about 20 minutes. Panel, are you ready?
Yes, sir.
What is the legacy of Dr. King in regards to social justice and equity? Judge Griffen.
You're on mute, Judge.
There, I'm unmuted now. Thank you very much, Professor Johnson, and thank you for inviting me for the panel. The legacy of Dr. King is that he is and will forever be known as the greatest prophet for racial and social justice this nation has ever produced, hands down. And people talk about him as a civil rights leader. Yes, he was. Great orator. Yes, he was. But people need to remember, he was a Baptist preacher. He was a prophet first, last, and always. He was the child and grandchild of preachers. And he was steeped in the religion of Jesus, and he believed in human justice and social justice as a moral and ethical imperative. That's his legacy.
Thank you, Judge Griffen. Judge Byrd Manning.
You know, I think I told you at the time that you invited me to be on this panel with such esteemed and well-versed and highly academic persons that, I was going to be the amen corner more than anything. I think Judge Griffen summed it up beautifully. I like to just recall the fact that when Dr. King died, he was only 39. So significant to me is that he was wise in his youth and led so much by his convictions that it leaves no excuse for any of us to blame our age or our experience or our education on why we are not taking up the mantle for social justice and equity and human rights for all. But other than that, ditto what Judge Griffen said.
Okay, thank you. Professor Cummings.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mayo, for the invitation to be here. And I'm really pleased to be on the same panel as Judge Byrd Manning and Judge Griffen. You know, Martin Luther King died. He was killed more than 50 years ago. And yet we talk about him. His name is invoked across the world, not just across this nation. Martin Luther King's legacy for social justice is truly global, perhaps one of the greatest global leaders in connection with equality and fighting for the rights of the oppressed and for those that have been downtrodden. His legacy, his oratory, his speeches, the things that he's remembered and quoted for, I would venture to guess maybe more than any other American today, as far as how often he's invoked and the things that he's invoked for. I have really strong feelings about some of those things that I hope that we're able to talk about as we continue. But his legacy of social justice, I agree with both what Judge Byrd Manning and what Judge Griffen have said. Unparalleled impact.
Thank you, sir. What are your thoughts on social justice and equity in relation to the pandemic? Professor Cummings.
You're muted, Professor.
Yeah, got it. I remember the early days of the pandemic. You all will recall with me when it first hit the United States, and there was palpable fear. We were looking at New York City and all of the cases and the big cities that were struggling with the pandemic in the beginning. And the thing that stuck out to me most significantly in New York City was that so many of the frontline workers were Black Americans. And at the same time, we were hearing that the statistics of illness and death from COVID were overrepresented in the Black community. It was a shocking vision of just how far we are from realizing Martin Luther King's dream as far as equality is concerned, as far as equal opportunity is concerned. Black Americans were on the front lines protecting us, literally putting their lives on the line in the early days of the pandemic. And yet, because of lack of access to healthcare and because of overexposure, African-American lives were lost at rates significantly higher than other populations in the United States. And I think that in connection with social justice, what the pandemic has taught us is that, I every Martin Luther King Day, I sit and listen to a few of his speeches with my kids, and we listen to I Have a Dream together this year, all 17 minutes. Not just the I Have a Dream part, but all of it. And I'm going to talk about that today because I think there's some really important missing elements today from that speech. But it just rang so true to me that the pandemic has taught us that we are not there yet. I think if Martin Luther King were alive with us today, and like Judge Byrd Manning said, he would be probably in his 80s now. 90s. But if he were alive with us today, I would believe he would say we still have a way to go. And as far as realizing his dream, and the pandemic has made that, at least to me, very clear.
Judge Griffen.
The pandemic has reminded me of what Dr. King said in his last book, We Go From Here, Chaos, Our Community. He kept reminding us that we all are in what he called an inescapable mutuality, that we are in a global network, that there is, because of our planet, we are now all neighbors, not because of people in the same neighborhood, but we're on the same planet. And what we haven't learned to do, and Professor Cummings said it quite well, we haven't learned how to treat everyone on the planet as a neighbor. So we now have the wealthy nations have produced 1/8 of the vaccines that they promised the poor and the middle income nations. And so if you are likely to be sick and die from COVID, one of the ironies is that you can get sick. The United States is the sickest and the most deathly place for COVID. It has the most vaccine, and it has been the most negligent in sharing the vaccine with those who have least. And Dr. King talked about that as only he could, but we didn't listen. And because he talked about it, and because he linked Vietnam with it, war and the amount of money we spent on war, people killed him. We'll talk about that. People killed him. And now the same kind of mindset that killed him wants to lionize it. I think that's the pandemic. We see all of the scabs of injustice, racism, materialism, capitalism, and militarism, all networked together.
Thank you, sir. Judge Byrd Manning.
So that question hit me in a little different way. For me, the words that came to my mind were exposure, awareness, because the social injustice and inequities that so many of us know firsthand. Well, when you're in a pandemic and stuck inside, things you didn't have to see, you were forced to see. And so we all know, because we all saw what we saw. And yet in the middle of video evidence, we were encouraged to not believe our own eyes. And but even in that same vein, the alliances that have formed, the allies that the oppressed have now gained, and just the overall awareness that, you know, now see that, you know, specifically about police brutality, that has always been real, but now you have been forced to see it. And the pandemic brought that exposure and awareness in a way that I think had not been brought heretofore, except during the civil rights movement, when certain incidents were televised for people to have to see. But these realities have not diminished. They've just changed in form, but the pandemic has forced our eyes to see it.
Thank you. So we are here at the University of Arkansas Pulaski Tech College. How does education have a role in social justice and equity? Judge Byrd Manning, back to you.
How does it, or how should it?
Yes, both.
Well, clearly, think people know what the Constitution says, and what our expectation is that everyone will have an education that is equal. But we all also know that that is not, in fact, the case, and has not been since the beginning of history in America. Quite frankly, education is such the springboard to opportunity that if it is not equitably provided, then clearly the outcomes for people are adversely affected. And so, you know, that's the generic surface answer. And now you're going to get these academic responses from Judge Griffen and Judge Cummings to springboard off my generic surface response.
Thank you. Professor Cummings.
So the great Charles Hamilton Houston was one of the deans of Howard Law School and the mentor of Thurgood Marshall. When he was the dean at Howard Law School, he said that lawyers can either be parasites on society or social engineers. So if, like me, you attend Howard Law School, you recognize you only really have two options. You can be a parasite or you can be a social engineer. And what I think Charles Hamilton Houston meant by social engineer was someone that was dedicated to changing the law for the better, using the tools at hand to make the law representative for everyone. So a legal education, I'm going to focus on legal education. I see several of my students from Bowen Law School have tuned in, and I want to speak to them in connection with the fact that a legal education can truly equip individuals to change the world. Now, I know that's a huge, sweeping, superlative statement, but let's just talk about changing the communities that we live in, changing our families, protecting our loved ones with this law degree that Judge Byrd Manning and Judge Griffen and I share. The opportunity to go to law school, to equip and empower yourself with a knowledge base that will then allow you to go out and lead people. I really want to thank Judge Byrd Manning for referring to me as Judge Cummings. That's outstanding. Thank you, Judge Byrd Manning. Maybe you're forecasting something in the future, who knows? But I really want to focus in on the fact that if you use education, an undergraduate education, a legal education to equip and empower yourself with knowledge, you then can truly lead. You then can truly change. You can write legislation. You can run for political office. You can lead movements. You can start centers. There's things you can do that can impact A, your family, B, your community, C, your city and state, and ultimately, hopefully, the nation. And so I believe that social justice and education are tied up, inextricably intertwined, particularly if you seek to be a social engineer, someone that wants to use your degree and your law degree to change the world, to make a difference, to impact the community that you live in and serve.
Thank you. Judge Griffen.
I think of education as sort of a superpower. I'm a science fiction fan, and I think of, the Avengers or Superman or Black Panther or Thor or Black Widow, and I think of education as a superpower. When I was growing up, and I'm a child of the 60s, I was born in 52, so I'm part of the last generation of Black people who were born in segregation and grew into the desegregation age. My elders said, people can take what you get, but they can never take what you know. People can never take what you know. And so the education opportunities that we have give us the power to do things. And remember, people in physics know, power is defined as the energy required to do work. And so education gives us the power to work this thing called justice, to work the levers of justice. However, power, as Dr. King said, is never neutral. Power can be misused, it can be abused, and we've seen that. And so the question is, will we use, as Professor Cummings said, we use our superpower to be parasites, as Charles Hamilton Houston said, or will we use superpower to restructure? And Dr. King talked about a radical revolution of values, to restructure our society and restructure our world so that people will not live their lives being beaten and bruised and robbed as they go through life's journey because they are not empowered. Those of us who have education have the superpower to make that kind of difference. Byrd, Manning, and Professor Cummings mentioned, and we have an obligation, a moral obligation, to use that superpower to avenge the wrongs that have been done to people, to protect people who are vulnerable, and to dismantle structures that are oppressive.
Thank you. Okay. What effect has social media on social justice and equity? Judge Griffen.
I think it's had a mixed effect. First of all, social media has been one of the great equalizers. Thanks to social media, everybody can be a publisher. Everybody can be, and that's a good thing. You don't have permission from the local news outlets to publish something. And now we, for instance, the 17-year-old woman who videotaped the murder of George Floyd made a difference across the world. People in Palestine got on social media after Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, and they were sending text messages to folks in Ferguson on how to deal with tear gas. And so social media has had a powerful impact. At the same time, we know that people have used social media platforms for illicit and oppressive ends. Power is never morally neutral. Dr. King said it. And so we have to know that it is a benefit if used beneficially. It can be used oppressively, and it can be oppressive. It can be used to bully. It can be used to target the weak. It can be used to propagate a lie or lies. And it is incumbent upon us as both the powerful to use social media and those who consume social media to know the difference. We have a moral obligation to use it wisely and morally. And we have a moral obligation wise in screening ourselves and our minds. Don't drink all the Kool-Aid. Don't drink all the Kool-Aid, because everything that looked like Kool-Aid isn't Kool-Aid.
Thank you. Judge Byrd Manning.
Likewise, I think social media has been a positive and a negative. I like the idea that social media has been used to uplift voices and stories, certainly has created awareness. It is a conduit for organization and activism and promoting thoughts where people can convene their thoughts and their plans of action. And clearly some of those are positive thoughts and plans of action, and others are not so positive, at least in my opinion. But I do think social media has been crucial in a positive and a negative way as far as social justice and equity is concerned, especially now because it's fast. I mean, you can get the news just like that, whether it's accurate or whether it's not, whether it's good or whether it's bad, in a second or less, you can have the news. So.
Okay, thank you. Professor Cummings.
I just want to echo what Judge Griffen and Judge Byrd Manning just said. I agree with everything that they've said. And so I'd like to take a moment to talk about something that's been prevalent on social media and how I think that impacts Dr. Martin Luther King's legacy. One of the things that's been really raging in the past few months has been this critical race theory backlash, where there has been a significant social media presence on critical race theory being a sort of target for negativity. And I want to be really clear about this because a lot of what I've seen on social media in this critical race theory backlash era is that many of these people invoke the memory and the words of Martin Luther King to support this backlash against critical race theory. And so I wanted to speak to that for just a moment. One of the things that I think that the folks that are, you know, critical race theory was developed in the legal academy, and critical race theory at its essence says that race is an intractable part of daily life, and that racism is sort of baked into the DNA and the institutions and systems of this country. That's basically what critical race theory says, which to me isn't really that controversial. You know, when you have a constitution that bakes slavery into the Constitution, that makes African Americans 3/5 of a person, or that, you know, forces states to return slaves to their former slave owner. I mean, our founding document has racism and slavery baked into it. So for critical race theory to say that our nation's systems and institutions are infected with race from the beginning, I just don't see that as that critical. But the point I want to make here, and I'll make it briefly, is that Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech, everyone knows about, you know, the day that he dreamed of, where his children would be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And everyone quotes that and uses it to support sort of this color blindness that we're seeking as a country. But what people fail to remember is that Martin Luther King's entire speech was about the fact that African Americans, Black Americans in our country had received a bad check that had been returned as insufficient funds. And he said, we are waiting for the Bank of Justice to recognize the rights and equality of Black Americans. And his dream certainly is inspirational, and it's certainly something that we should strive to attain. But I think if Dr. King were alive today, he would still say that that bad check has not been fully funded. When we have, as Judge Griffen suggested, a white police officer kneeling on the back in broad daylight, kneeling on the neck of a Black man for nothing more than allegedly passing, you know, an illegitimate $20 bill. I mean, we are not there as a country. And so when you have this backlash, when you have these people saying America's not a racist country, or critical race theory teaches people to hate whites, those things aren't true. And anyone that says that Martin Luther King would support this backlash against critical race theory, forget his legacy, which was that he was about equality. And he spent the last years of his life, remember, he lived for 4 or 5 years after the "I Have a Dream" speech, and he spent those years striving for economic equality, to get Black Americans out of poverty, and to get the equal opportunity realized for all Americans. And so to this day, I say that the Bank of Justice still needs to equalize opportunity for all Americans. And this sort of in my opinion, bastardize Martin Luther King's legacy, because ultimately it was about equal opportunity. It was about America making good on its promises. We've made progress. I love the United States of America. Every time I travel out of the country, when I get back home, I kneel down and kiss the soil. But we're not there yet. We have work to do, and I think that Dr. King would agree with me that his dream has not yet been realized. Equal opportunity, economic justice, we still have work to do.
Thank you. What are your thoughts on the school to prison pipeline? Professor Cummings?
So all of our audience should know that Dr. Mayo asked us to keep our remarks to 60 seconds, and you can already tell I've blown that way out of proportion. So I will try to be really quick on this one. I believe, and this, I may as well go ahead and get controversial with everybody. I believe that policing in America is infected with a sickness. I just think that we don't police properly or equally across races and across the country. And when we put policing into schools, that's when we begin having problems with the school to prison pipeline. So for one, I don't think police should be in schools. Maybe we can have security officers, maybe we could have, teachers trained differently. But when you put law enforcement that culturally is anti-Black, remember folks, policing evolved from slave patrols, particularly in the South. So remember that the people that became deputies and marshals and sheriffs were slave catchers before. And so if you think about how that culturally infects policing and the policing of Black bodies, then you can understand why introducing law enforcement into our schools, especially elementary schools and middle schools with children, then you get this really perverse impact of an anti-Black police culture infecting children's educational opportunities. And so to be brief, I'll cut it there, but I think it's really important that we look for much better ways to keep schools and school children safe than introducing policing with its real cultural infectedness into the educational process for children.
Thank you. Judge Griffen.
I agree with Professor Cummings. I would go one step further. We have a school to prison pipeline for the reasons he mentioned, because we have placed the former slave catcher profession in the schools, but we also have a birth to prison pipeline. One of the problems is that when you are born, if you are born Black, brown, or indigenous, you are targeted, you are profiled at birth, and you are more likely born into a system that has already identified you as, quote, at risk. You have been identified as a threat. I know of children who have been profiled by police before they got to be school aged. And they were invariably people of color. I don't know white children who got profiled by the police before they got to be school age, but I know children who were profiled by the police before they got to kindergarten. And by the time they got to kindergarten, they had been identified in a system that has identified them by zip code, identified them by address, identified them by home, and identified them as a likely person to be watched, and put them in a school system with a police officer. You have the problem. I'll go one other step on controversy. I told you I'm from the last generation of Black folks before slavery, before segregation. We didn't have police officers in segregated schools. We didn't start getting police officers until white folks got scared of Black folks in schools. Okay? You didn't put white cops in schools until you put Black children in schools with white folks. Because you didn't have white cops in schools with white children, even though white children were doing the same kind of stuff that Black children were doing. It is ironic that the mass shootings in schools have been perpetrated by white youth. However, we talk about Black on Black crime and talk about the school to prison pipeline with the Black population, but we don't talk about the birth to prison pipeline, the birth to crime pipeline of white children, where we have white children who come to school and do things, but they get sent to the principal's office and go home and get a lecture from parents and come back to school next day. Black children get placed in a police database. That is institutional racism at its core. That's what the critical race theory issue that Professor Cummings talked about makes it so important. And I'm so glad you brought it up, but I'm glad to talk about the school to prison pipeline, because when you talk about that, remember, it's a birth to prison pipeline.
Thank you. Judge Byrd Manning.
And I was looking forward to this question because part of, I think you indicated, I'm the judge in 8th Division, but 8th Division is one of the juvenile courts. And I have made it my business to try to bust that thing up. In addition to what both Dr. Cummings and, well, Professor Cummings, I don't want to give you all these titles, I'm giving you all the titles today, and Judge Griffen.
I appreciate every title you give me, Judge.
Have talked about, I think policing in schools exacerbated the problem immensely, and the birth to prison pipeline is as real gets. Even before police were in schools, there are administrative policies that are designed to essentially give up any and all disciplinary options for schools. There are zero tolerance policies that by and large adversely affect Black and brown children. There are policies in place that press forward removing a child from a learning environment. So we're gonna put you out of our class, then we're gonna put you out of our school, then we put you out in the community and give you no resources, no alternative. And so then here come the interactions with the police, which grow this pipeline that is very, very real. And these same administrative policies include disciplinary policies that are options for administration that they don't choose to engage. Since police came in schools, they've criminalized behaviors that should never have been criminalized. Adolescents do adolescent things. Some of those adolescent things, fighting in school, is now you get a battery charge, you get dragged off by the police, and you end up here in our building in detention. Versus when, well, at least those of us on the panel were young. I didn't get in fights, but I knew kids that got in fights. You might get suspended and then you come back to school because you more than likely are going to be friends again in a couple of days. But now that is not even an option for children, because that falls into one of those categories of zero tolerance policy, which is going to cause you to be removed from school. And while it's easy to get pushed out into the pipeline, it is difficult to reverse that process. When you're in it, it is difficult to reintegrate into a regular school setting. It is difficult to reintegrate into what most kids want to consider normalcy, because you got this target on your back that came since you were born. And now you've got police in schools who get called in for little to nothing, which then escalates into criminal activity. And now you're arrested. So the prison to pipeline, the school to prison to pipeline is incredibly real. And I know it is because during COVID, the number of juveniles who came to this building based on school-based arrests, it's statistically shown that that number went way down. So a lot of court contact comes from school referrals. And those are either based on these policies that are in place that are designed to get kids out, or because of the police in our schools that, as Professor Cummings said, already infected and have their, and not just the police, there are teachers and administrators who have their own cultural incompetencies. They can't relate to some of these students. They're not thinking about what their lives are like at home. All they know is I have this immediate issue and I just need you to be out of my class and out of my school. But that's all I have to say about that.
All right, thank you. The chat is open. Please ask questions of the panel in the chat. The chat is open. While participants are asking questions, let's go ahead and do another question. Who is making the greatest advancements in social justice and equity, and what are they doing? Judge Griffen?
Oh, I think that there are a number of people. Young people are doing some wonderful stuff. I mean, the young people are doing some wonderful stuff. Both the hip hop movement brought some new prophets into the forefront. Thanks to social media, people are coming up on social media, and it is young people of color, young LGBTQ people, young people who are come from all backgrounds, from all parts of the world, are doing one. People are, I think we have to be careful not to say who. I think we need to say who is, because thanks to social media, we can all be more effective if we will. The question is not whether we can be making advancements. The question is whether we will be. And Dr. King was very intentional. Dr. King said, anyone can be a servant, and therefore anyone can be great. All you have to do is be able to serve, and we can all make a difference. But the truth of the matter is that we have some young people, we have some elders, we have some people from different kinds of backgrounds, and those differences are being made in music, they've been made in the arts, they've been made in education and athletics. So we see all kinds of stuff. When professional athletes now take stances that weren't taken when I was a boy, but also Greta Thunberg is making stances on climate change and challenging stuff. And so we have a 15, 16-year-old woman across the world who is doing some stuff, and we have professional athletes doing some stuff. So it's all connected. It's great.
Okay, Judge Byrd Manning.
I agree with Judge Griffen that I think there probably are a lot of unsung heroes in this movement as well, because I think with many things that are national or global issues, it's the ground game and the groundswell and the community activism that really ends up having the most significant impact. But one organization that I am really impressed with right now is the Poor People's Campaign. It seems like a very well organized conglomerate of all kinds of people who are just insistent upon moral revival, essentially. They want a moral revival is what the effort is about, and it's very organized and structured, and I believe their mission is about having a plan of action and moving that action forward. And they're all over the country, I think from Arkansas to Alaska. And I get text messages on a regular basis, but I think they are a pretty big movement in terms of current social justice groups.
Thank you. Professor Cummings.
I agree with everything that Judge Byrd Manning and Judge Griffen have said, and I want to take a different tack. I want all of the students listening in today to recognize that Judge Griffen, Judge Byrd Manning, Dr. Mayo Johnson, and myself, we were sitting where you are 20, 30 years ago. We were just students. Students that felt like they really wanted to do something and make a difference. But now 20, 30 years later, Judge Byrd Manning's a judge. Judge Wendell Griffen's a judge and a pastor. Dr. Mayo's got his doctorate degree and he's a professor at Pulaski Tech.
Yeah, just professor.
That's a professor. But
we're handing out titles today, sir.
yeah, yeah. I'm just feeling the love.
It's like
yeah.
a black church.
Thanks for the love.
I want everyone to recognize, though, that if you have a vision for what you want to do and how you want to be a change agent, you can do it. Because, you know, as Judge Byrd Manning said, Martin Luther King was a young man. You know, this is not to self-aggrandize, but I want to illustrate. A year and a half ago, Professor Anastasia Bowles and I were just having lunch together. And we were talking about what we wanted to do at Bowen Law School and what we could do to, you know, help the state of Arkansas. And we just sort of had this little glimmer of an idea called the Center for Racial Justice and Criminal Justice Reform. And it was just an idea a year and a half ago. A year and a half later, guys, we have started a center at the law school that has received over $1.25 million from Walmart to engage in social justice efforts in the state of Arkansas. Some of you sitting in this room right now with us are working with us on the Court Observation Project, where we are spreading out throughout the state of Arkansas, the first ever statewide court observation project in the nation, funded by Walmart, to ensure that our citizens have the same equal treatment in the courtrooms that they sit in. And our students are helping us with that court observation project. And I'm really happy to announce, I probably shouldn't announce this because we're going to do a press release, but we just signed a contract with Walmart for $210,000 to engage in an enhanced community policing project. So who's helping? Well, who knew? But Walmart wants to be engaged in ending systemic racism. And two random professors at Bowen Law School sat together and said, hey, you know what? Let's start a center. So my point is you are young, many of you, and you can be that change agent. You can engage. You can be a part of the Poor People's Campaign. You can be a part of the Center for Racial Justice. You can be a part of starting your own organization and deciding that you want to be on the front lines of equal opportunity, social justice, and those things are all you need to do is decide that that's what you want your life to be about, and you can make that happen.
Thank you. Let's go to the chat. So I see a question. How do you feel cancel culture affects legislation? Let's start with Professor Cummings.
That's tough, you know, because I'm a big fan. When I was in law school, the great Jesse Jackson came to Howard and spoke to us, and we at Howard and Jesse Jackson's movement really believed in the boycott, you know, that the boycott can really make a difference. If you decide, you know, when I was in law school, Texaco was caught red-handed on cassette tape at the time. That tells you how long ago I was in law school, where their executives were saying, they were caught on tape in a board meeting saying, you know, Black Americans will not ever reach any high levels of leadership at our company. They were caught making those statements at a board meeting. And they were sued. They settled the lawsuit for something like $250 million. You can look it up, 1990s Texaco, racial and employment discrimination. And we all boycotted Texaco. You know, and unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know if they were Texaco owned or franchised, but the Texacos in Washington, D.C. went out of business. So I believe in the power of the boycott. I believe that if corporate America is acting improperly, you can take your consumer dollar elsewhere and make them pay for their bad behavior. And you can also take your consumer dollar to those, you know, I hadn't shopped at Walmart for years and years. And then when I found out they were into social justice and racial justice, you know, I go in Walmart now. My Ben and Jerry's, I buy at Walmart. So you guys know that's but you can use your consumer dollars to either boycott or to favor. And so cancel culture is tough because, you know, I believe in the power of the boycott. I believe in the power of movements and protesting and marching. But at the same time, I think cancel culture and social media makes it so that, you know, someone makes a wrong step or someone, you know, inadvertently steps in it, then they're canceled. And I think that's problematic. So I don't have an answer to it, but specifically to the question of how cancel culture impacts legislation, I think that that's why I was saying earlier that if you're into making a difference, you know, it might make sense to get your feet moving towards the political game. Run for office, be involved, work with legislators, and you know, I think legislation needs to be inspired by people that are motivated toward equal opportunity and social justice.
Okay.
I'm going to yield to Judge Griffen if you were going to call my name.
Well, let's do this because we want to get to some of the questions in the chat. We'll probably look for one response.
All right.
From the panel. So there is a question asked specifically for you, Judge Byrd Manning. What are your thoughts on teen court or restorative justice type courts in schools?
I'm a fan. I'm a fan of all things restorative. I think the teen court model is an ideal model. It very much reminds me of childhood, how you learn the lesson, then you have to regurgitate what you've learned about the lesson. And teen court offers an opportunity for young folks who have made mistakes to be judged, if you will, by their peers, which in real life doesn't happen, not for juveniles anyway. But these kids get to be judged by their peers, and then they pay if they are deemed to have committed a violation, they have the opportunity to then serve as part of the court, as part of their give back. And there are some teen courts right here in Pulaski County, one of which I'm well familiar, out of North Little Rock, which is an extraordinary program which has developed some otherwise very shy and reserved folks who got caught up in a little bit of foolishness, have turned them into some outstanding student leaders. And so what we all should want to see from kids who can be restored, every opportunity given to them to be restored. I talked a little bit earlier about the policies that are in place, specifically in the school districts here within Pulaski County. Each of them has now adopted or included in their policy some restorative justice steps. Now, how effectively they are actually engaging them, I'm not very sure, because I know that there are still problems and issues with how discipline is meted out. But I am a huge fan and proponent of the restorative aspects of all things discipline and education, and certainly a fan of teen courts. And I think if we had more of them, we certainly would see some turnaround, even from some young people who folks probably wouldn't give a second chance to, there is some actual evidence that these kinds of programs can be beneficial to them.
Okay, and thank you. Judge Griffen, this was for you. How does the state fix the problem students face in their homes that in part cause their behavior in schools?
Ooh, you made me lay down for that.
Yeah, that was-
Well, I think we have to go back to what Dr. King reminded us. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. If we begin with the proposition that understand that power is first, people first get their first taste of power at home. They get their first taste of abusive power and redemptive power, restorative justice and punitive justice. They get their first taste of power at home. And they also get the first taste of the nexus between the connection between love and justice at home. So that when we have a society, and I think here we go with critical race theory, when we have a society that had from its inception, from its beginning, was built on imbalances in power and oppressing people groups in systemic kind of ways, so that those people groups, whether they were women or people of color or immigrants, were faced with extraordinary pressures just to survive. That what happens when people come out of the survival situation is they bring their scars with them into society. They bring their scars. And some people bring scars, and those scars make them determined to scar other people. Other people bring scars, and they find a need to find some kind of way to be soothed or sedated from their scars. But what has to happen is we have to realize that you can't police that. You have to have a healing situation. This is not, policing is punitive. Nobody goes to the police department to get healed of disease. Not if you got any sense, okay? And a lot of the problems we're dealing with in our society are societal issues that are based upon people who are ill, who are sick, who have been wounded, who have been diseased at home because of the way our society has been structured. Dr. King talked about that, and that's what he talked about, that wonderful speech nobody talks about, made on April 4, 1967, the year to the day before he got killed. A Time to Break Silence, Google it. He called for a radical revolution of values, and he did use the word radical and revolution and values in the same sentence. And when you have that radical revolution of values, then you start talking about healing homes, healing neighborhoods, healing people, and making people healthy as opposed to hurting. Now, that's a long answer, but that's the truth.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions about the future of critical race theory in Arkansas. Professor Cummings.
Yeah. So as far as I remember, there was some legislation introduced to disallow the teaching of, they didn't use the word critical race theory necessarily, but the disallowance of certain things in classrooms. And if I remember correctly, last legislative session, that was beat back by First Amendment for First Amendment reasons. But the truth of the matter is there is legislation being passed across the country that are muzzling professors in the classroom from either using critical race theory or talking about slavery in a pejorative way. And I think that that's, you know, obviously problematic. It's problematic. Okay, I'm just going to be real with you all. It's problematic when legislators adopt unconstitutional legislation. That's a problem. And it happens in Arkansas. It happens in states across the country where it throws legislation to the courts, where the courts, if they're interpreting the Constitution, in my view, correctly, will strike down these legislative enactments that say you can't teach this or you can't teach that. So that's one piece. That's one thing that's problematic. But you know, what I think is important is to give students all of the ideas and all of the information and let the students sift through and see what rings true to them. It's important, I think, to recognize that there is a theory in the United States that says race is intractable. Racism is, it's institutional and systematic. It's baked into the Constitution. I don't think that's controversial. Some people do, but that's the basic essence of critical race theory. The future of critical race theory in Arkansas remains clouded. My guess would be that the legislature might take up some types of free speech muzzling of teachers and professors that would then go to the courts, that would then, in my view, be deemed unconstitutional. But these types of legislative enactments are happening across the country. And at last count, there were 6 or 7 states that have enacted some kind of restriction about whether or not you can A, cast the United States in a negative light, B, make white students feel guilty, neither of which are the aims of critical race theory, but things that are being enacted legislatively across the country. And so I think it's problematic for a lot of reasons. I feel like students should have all full information put in front of them, and students should have the opportunity to see what rings true to them, what doesn't. And from my perspective, critical race theory is really the narrative, the true narrative of Black and brown citizens in the country, telling their view historically from their perspective. It's truth to many of us.
Yeah. Professor Johnson, I like to remind people that folks shouldn't use terms they can't define. And I've seen and heard a whole lot of politicians talking about critical race theory, and they can't define critical, they can't define race, and they can't define the theory in the same context. Critical simply means careful or exact evaluation. It means discerning. It means penetrating. It means applying a critique of the way our systems have been affected by racism and how the narrative of race, the construct of race, has been embedded into economics, law, education, medicine, and every other system. Now that's what critical race theory is in a nutshell. However, politicians have gotten a lot of airtime, getting parents afraid that their children are learning critical race theory in schools. They're not, because critical race theory is not taught in any undergraduate school in the country. 10 times double dog dare any politician to prove otherwise. Mm-hmm. And secondly, they say Dr. King wouldn't believe it. Well, they haven't read King. I mean, goodness gracious life. Dr. King said America is a racist society. He said that. Dr. King said that one of the real problems we have is that many white moderates do not want to own the fact of their racism. Dr. King said that. But because they have been so willing to pimp Dr. King's name for their own popularity, and so ignorant about the meaning of critical race theory, and because people let them get away with it, and I must say, people in the media let them get away with it, they have this big thing. So I'm so glad Professor Cummings raised the issue, and I'm glad the question came up, because quite honestly, those of you at Pulaski Tech are in a position to push back I tell people when they come to court, I tell lawyers this, I wear a t-shirt, but it does not have Boo Boo the Fool on it. And when you bring a Boo Boo the Fool kind of argument to me, whether you're a legislator or anybody else, I'm going to push back on you and say, excuse me, you don't know what you're talking about. When you hear people talking about critical race theory making people feel bad, excuse me, grading makes people feel bad. Hello? Hello? If you don't know what you don't know, and you're told you don't know what you're talking about, you feel bad. That's also called how you get an education. Nobody gets learning by being told to feel good about being wrong.
Okay, thank you. Another question from the chat. What can the average citizen do to help improve things besides voting?
Engage in what I call critical analysis. Don't drink the Kool-Aid. Just because you see it on your favorite news channel, don't believe it. Question everything. Professor Cummings, Judge Byrd Manning, and I are lawyers, and we as a profession get a bad reputation because we are told that we ask too many questions. But quite frankly, Socrates said that to question is to know. And that is how you know. So I would encourage, and I don't know what we mean by the average person. I think everybody has a God-given obligation, because we all have a brain. We have a God-given obligation to think. And thinking is work. Thinking is supposed to be work. But we also have a mouth. So the mouth should not be engaged in conversation before the brain has been engaged in contemplation. Too many folks are engaged in conversation about stuff they haven't contemplated. Think about it, critique it, and then get into the conversation and be engaged in work. Don't be afraid to dissent. Don't be afraid to boycott. Don't be afraid to get involved. Dr. King did that. And he did that as a young person.
Professor Johnson, I'm going to take this opportunity to make my last comment. And those of you that are my students that are here today know that we have class in about 6 minutes. So I'll see you all. I'll see you all in class momentarily. I'm so grateful to have been here and to have been on this panel with Judge Byrd Manning and Judge Griffen, and with you, Professor Mayo. I deeply believe that in each of us is a moral compass that can recognize the truth that we know to be true and recognize the humanity and the beauty in everyone around us. And so I believe that every one of us can be activists. I believe I was at a one of my law professor friends passed early from breast cancer. And I was at her wake and her funeral a couple of years ago. And this is a law professor at American University in Washington, D.C. And I was stunned when they had an open mic at her funeral to see how many community members, formerly homeless, formerly incarcerated, came up and took the mic. And they talked about Pam, and they talked about Pam Bridgewater coming home from work and sitting down on the curb next to them and asking them how their lives are, and then using her law degree to help them, deal with some of the systemic problems that they had dealt with. I was startled at person after person. And Pam was just a human being, just a lawyer that had decided that not only is she going to, on a macro level as a law professor, try to change the law, but on a micro level, she was going to love her neighbors. And I'm sure Judge Griffen has a sermon on, you know, love God and love thy neighbor. And so in each one of us is embedded an ability to see the humanity of others, to love and decide that we are going to be a part of the solution. And so that goes back to what I said earlier. You know, every one of us can start a center or join a protest or decide that we're going to be a part of the solution. And you know, Dr. King's, you know, words were always about loving, but not standing for injustice, just deciding not on my watch. I am not going to live in this world and let this inhumanity continue on my watch. I am going to do something. And so that's my something is starting this center. And my something is trying to, on a micro level, work with individuals that need my help. And that's what we can all do. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here today. Professor Mayo, thank you for the invitation. It's been an honor.
Thank you, Professor Cummings. I have another question.
I'm like Professor Cummings. He's got class and I've got course.
Okay.
Judge,
But I will,
good
if
to
I
see you,
can,
Professor.
if
Good
I
to
can,
see you.
if I can have a last remark, I would also
Yes.
just say,
Okay.
piggybacking on what Professor Cummings has said throughout this entire thing, at the end of the day, you have to acknowledge and speak truth. Acknowledge and speak truth even when it hurts you. And basic, do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And now I have to go to court. It has been a pleasure to sit on the panel with these esteemed folks, and thank you for the invitation. And I apologize that I have to go.
No, you're doing the state's work. Thank you very much, and congratulations again on your wedding.
Thank you.
Judge Griffen, what's your time?
I'm good. I cut this time into my schedule, so this I'm yours.
Let me ask you this question. How have you been helped to get where you are? And what advice do you have for others who want to go in a similar direction?
I've been helped by people that would be thought of as unknowns. I grew up where in a Black community, in a rural Black community in Southwest Arkansas, in Pike County, P-I-K-E County in Southwest Arkansas, near D-Light, D-E-L-I-G-H-T. And I remember my father and my mother were laborers. My father had an 8th grade education. My mother had a high school education, and they were laborers, but we were readers. And so my father taught me to read before I was 5 years old. And I could write my name and I could count to 100 when I was 5 years old because my father did that. And so that was fundamental. Reading is fundamental, and that was an important thing. The people in my church were fundamentally important. They taught me how to stand up and talk to people and stand up straight and speak up. When my father took me to get a haircut, I sat in the barber chair, and the Black man who cut my hair began to ask me questions. And he didn't ask me how I liked the latest cartoons. He asked me the capital of Nebraska, and the capital of Louisiana, and the capital of Michigan. Now, this was a Black man in the mid and late 50s and 60s. That was fundamental. I had teachers push me. I flunked out of college because I got sidetracked into whiskey and women, and I flunked them too. And so when I got back into college, teachers helped me and got me on the right track. So I say all that to say that there are any number of ways that people can help you and that you can help others. You don't have to have a title. You don't have to have a degree. You just have to have a desire to help. And I thank God for those people who basically poured into me. There are times I was not their child. They didn't have to do it. Nobody was paying them to do it, but they made a difference. And quite frankly, everything I do because I think of what they did for me.
Hey, sir, this is the last question. What are common misconceptions people have, and how can we combat these misconceptions and communicate more effectively?
One misconception is that I don't have power. Yes, people have power. Every individual has power. The power to speak, the power to think, the power to help, the power to hurt, the power to protect, the power to defend, the power to build up systems that are encouraging and embracing and fair and equitable, and the power to dismantle systems that are oppressive. So we first of all have to get over the misconception that I don't have power. Stop thinking I can't. Once I had elders tell me, can't never can, can't never did, can't never do. And so that old story, that old book, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can, the little engine that could, be the little engine that could. Remember, you can. Second misconception is that imperial power is right. Just because it is imperial, just because it's big and structured, because it's authority, it's got to be right. Might is not simply right because it is mighty. It's simply mighty. But there's a reason we talk about the little engine that could. There's a reason we talk about David and Goliath. There's a reason we cheer for the underdog. We believe that there can be effectiveness with little things, little people. And last thing, misconception is that we cannot make a difference together. We can make a difference if we will work together, and we don't have to be the same color, the same gender, the same sex, the same nationality, the same religion. We simply have to respect the humanity of every person and believe that at the end of the day, every person needs love. Every person deserves justice. Every person wants to have a healing and loved life, and do that for every person. I want to thank you, Professor Johnson, for inviting me to be part of this. Professor Cummings did, and Judge Byrd did. I want to say thank you very much. And I want to say, as a personal privilege, it's good to see you because I knew you when.
Yes, sir. Way back.
I knew you when, way back in the day, when my hair was not gray, and my waistline was narrow. And
Yes,
it's
sir.
good to see you, man. Hey, I'm proud of you.
Good to see you. Good working with you.
Yes, sir. Thanks for the invitation.
Yes, sir. In closing, thank you to our esteemed panel members. Thank you to our college staff. Thank you to our participants in the audience. This event will be posted to YouTube. In the legacy of Dr. King, be of service to your community and love each other. Everybody can be great because everybody can serve. Be well and be safe. Take care.